welcome to today's inVantage EOS Lightbulb series. In these series, we're talking with partners to the EOS process. These are organizations and individuals that are geared to help entrepreneurial businesses like the ones that are running on EOS. I'm so excited today. I have Scott Peterson, the founder of Carver Peterson, with us today, and he's going to talk about sales expertise that he brings and his team brings to organizations. But as we know, the whole goal of EOS is to strengthen the 6 key components, as you can see here. And we tend to identify that there's a sales gap or a sales challenge when we start to see things at the end of the year or goals being missed, not hitting exactly the mark that you were hoping to hit. We also find that it's the sales function that often gets a lot of attention because we obviously focus on setting revenue targets, revenue methods, and the rocks that we set are almost always including a certain customer metrics. So what we're going to do today is Scott's going to share about his business and what they do, and I'm going to help us connect some of those to the EOS process as we talk about those. So I'm really excited. Scott, welcome. Thank you for joining today. I so appreciate it. Why don't we talk a little bit about your business and your organization? Share what Carver Peterson does.
Sure. Well, first off, Kelly, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. So yeah, a little bit about Carver Peterson. I started the company 6 years ago, and we partner with growth-minded entrepreneurs and growing organizations to build high-performing sales teams that are repeatable, scalable, and sustainable.
That's awesome. I would love for you to share a little bit of your own entrepreneurial journey. I think that adds an awful lot of credibility as we're talking with different business owners and leadership teams. They understand that you've been in their seat. So tell your Scott story for a minute.
Sure. So prior to starting Carver Peterson in 2014, I ended up spending 13 years with one of the largest recruiting and staffing firms in the country, and quite frankly, in the world. The organization has a really, really cool story where the two co-founders originated the business in the garage or basement or however that goes. And it's now a international multi-billion-dollar organization that grew organically, account by account, market by market, country by country. So getting the opportunity to grow up in an organization that was wildly disciplined. And while I never heard EOS per se while I was in the organization, understanding these six quadrants or aspects of the EOS model is in so many ways how we grew up. My first 7 years were as a traditional seller. What was really interesting, building something from scratch. We were the most expensive. We weren't necessarily the best. So just a great way to learn as a young salesperson. In my late 20s, I was asked to lead one of the offices. The organization moved me from Boston to San Diego to, quite frankly, turn around one of the underperforming offices, where as a young leader, I walked into a right seat, wrong person situation or situations and had to make some pretty tough decisions as a young leader. And, over the course of 3 years leading that team, by getting that people piece really right, we were able to see some really significant growth. And ultimately, the organization asked me to relocate to Chicago, Illinois, and lead one of the top 5 offices in the country out of 250 offices where, the organization just was asking me to help evolve a winning team into a different style of winning team. So I ended up with, 7 years as a traditional seller and then 6 years as the one responsible for building and leading and managing a large office responsible for the P&L. But quite frankly, most of our employees were tied to inside and outside sales. So I felt very well prepared in so many ways, when I went out and started my business in 2014 to start really impacting how organizations were, one, building their sales organization, and then 2, making sure that they're winning more of the right customers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So then that fueled you to start Carver Peterson. Talk a little bit about the startup process there and what you were really focused on and maybe where it's evolved to today as far as how you help your clients.
Sure. Well, I've always had entrepreneurial blood. My dad is a longtime custom home builder in my hometown of Corvallis, Oregon. and he built beautiful homes along the way, and also played a big role in coaching my teams and being active in my childhood. And that was something that I always really aspired to, and wanted to do really just the same for my growing family. So there was always that kind of really in the blood. And then when I started the business in 14, what I found were these growing organizations where the founder was the rainmaker. The founder had been able to get the business to a certain level, and then was really being challenged, was really struggling to build a high performing sales team. And maybe it was a case where they had an outlier performer amongst a team of underperformers, or maybe it was a situation where the sales leader was a really tough role to find the right person to lead and drive that team. And so my work initially started almost as an interim VP of sales. I was stepping into some of these organizations and filling a very critical role and helping refine their sales strategy and streamline their sales process, and ultimately align and specialize their sales structure, so they could go about winning more of the right customers. And over these last 6 years, we've continued to refine our methodology. And I've added some really key and critical people to our team, and Selena Doran being the one most important to the business, who's been with me for almost 5 years now and has helped me create so much of our methodology. And we've turned it into a really repeatable, scalable process ourselves, to where we've been able to go in and really entrench ourselves and learn their business, and make sure that we're understanding who exactly their ideal client profile is and where they best belong, so we can go about building a sales playbook that truly allows them to capitalize on their strengths, and really capitalize on where they best position in the marketplace.
In the EOS terminology, we talk about the teams generally hit the ceiling. That's the terminology we use. And that's typically where, to your point, the founder or the leadership team all of a sudden feels like a stagnancy. They can't, either their hands are in too many pots in the business, or they're struggling to grow. And it could be that some of them have not been able to pass the reins, if you will, and delegate and elevate the work to the level that they're supposed to be doing. That's usually one of the points EOS gets brought into a business, is when they've hit that ceiling, or just struggling to break through that next growth level. And it usually has to do with a couple of things. One is we don't have the right people in the right seats, or we've got people wearing too many hats in a business. So the accountabilities and responsibilities that go with them are a little bit squishy or unclear. People are mowing each other's lawns, as I say. And then the other thing is they do lack a discipline and a sales process that is something that they can go to each time. Without repeatability, you can't really scale, because you can't just clone yourselves. I wish we could, but we can't. So creating that systematized approach to sales is critical. So why don't you tell me a little bit about some of the examples of problems you've solved for clients that they would be, feeling the relief after working with your tools and your process?
Yeah. So one of our earlier clients, a third-party logistics firm that, they had 80 or 90% of their revenue coming from one anchor account. And, in a lot of ways had been stuck, right at that 5 million in revenue for a long period of time, for years. They'd gone about trying to hire salespeople from competitors, and what they thought were, A and B talent were really, I'll call it C or D talent. So not really understanding the true profile, and having a hard time screening and selecting, and really not understanding what had truly what truly made them unique and different. And so, it's a really good example where, founder selling had gotten them to a certain point, and there was a plateau. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to go in and start analyzing their business, and how and where they win, and observing key moments of their process, and just really entrenching ourselves in their business. And as a result, we started identifying this ideal client profile, something that we refer to as the blue chip. They're blue chip clients, and started breaking down the demographics and psychographics and trigger events that take place in order to win more accounts like that. And you know, and also starting to really understand what the performance goals and expectations for those individuals, those sellers were. So, we were able to refine the strategy, so bring more clarity to that ideal client profile, start defining what good looked like at each incremental step. So, what does prospecting look like? What does outreach and connection look like? What does qualification look like? How do we ultimately propose and present our solution, overcome objections and gain the commitment, and then appropriately hand off into, delivery. And so defining all those key moments and key stages, and then setting really clear expectations. We were able to go from one anchor account to six. We were able to go from 5 million to 8 million in that first year, 8 to 11 in the second year. We actually had the opportunity to really step out and disengage, which is part of our business model, right? Is to stand it up on their side and make sure that they're able to do that work on their own. And they were able to go from 11 to 15 and 15 to 20. Now we still maintain that relationship and have our regular, our semi-regular check-ins, but it's just a really good case study or example of, just needing a more refined strategy, a more streamlined and repeatable process, and more specialization in structure, and quite frankly, a compensation model that will incentivize and drive the right behaviors of your salespeople.
Right. So in that example, which is fantastic, I want to tie it back. And when we're going through the implementation process of EOS, we tackle the people items first, because if you don't have great people, you can't achieve and develop a great vision. So we hit some of the hardest stuff first. But then in our second and third days of implementation, we work on what we call the Vision Traction Organizer, or the VTO. It's the 8 key questions you see there at the top of the graphic. And one of the areas that gets exposed early is the marketing strategy. So this is not a 10-page marketing strategy, but we ask them some key questions and gather some really key data, and includes defining what the target market is, the list. That is a hard thing to do. Some companies have a single target market, some have multiple, but they've never taken the time to define what is that ideal buyer profile. And we do talk about, there's the demographic, geographic, and psychographic, buying characteristics of those. The second is defining what we call their 3 uniques. These are the things that they do better as a trifecta, if you will, than anybody else in the competitors. And it's interesting. You usually kind of get some generic things to start, and then you have to keep digging and saying, okay, everyone does that, number 1. But when you add number 2 and number 3 to your 3 uniques, then you start to find your secret sauce. We also help them define what their proven process is. This is like the 1-pager graphic, if you will, that really outlines what is the client's experience going to be like you through the life cycle of the relationship. And then lastly, what's their guarantee? What's the guarantee they offer to remove the buying barriers and objections from the process? Whether it's 100% price guarantee as an example, but there's other really creative ones there. At that point, that's when we really start to see there's a need for additional sales development from the people perspective, the process and whatnot. So in the world of EOS, your services are identified very early as a potential need in the implementation, because obviously revenue is important, and that's a part of the vision building, is where do they want to be financially so that they live their best lives as entrepreneurs. So that resonates a lot with me, because we spend a lot of time helping them get primed to think about that, so they can actually be more effective. I'm always surprised how many people cannot define their ideal client profile until or have not been able to really taken the time to think about it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
What are the other symptoms that you'd say we need to watch out for in a company? So if I'm the CEO of a company and I'm experiencing some things, what might I be seeing that says, gosh, we need some of Scott's team's help?
Yeah. So there's really 3 things that happen. The most obvious is when there's turnover of a sales leader. So, and that's quite frankly one of the hardest roles to fill. What a lot of organizations do is, if you can promote from within, you can, you're ensuring that there's cultural alignment and understanding of the process and what works, but you might be pulling your best sales producer into a leadership or management role, which may or may not be the right role for them. So there's risk that comes along with that. When you bring someone in from the outside, they bring their style, their culture, their belief of what it should be. And so it's just a tough role to get right. And we see that role turnover quite a bit. And so that ends up being one of the biggest indicators. Another is, turnover in the sales team, or just an underperforming sales team. They're not meeting their goals and expectations. What's most common is that there's a star performer, and then there's others on that team that are way behind. But the mindset, for whatever reason, is a butt in the seat is better than no butt in the seat. When you really start breaking it down and diving in deeper, you realize that there's actually a lot of pain and punishment that comes with holding on to individuals that are, wrong seat, wrong person, as you well know. And then the other is the founder rainmaker that, just has too much responsibility on their hands, so they're trying to lead and manage a business, but then also, their primary rainmaker, and there's just not enough time devoted to business development. So those are really the big three.
When you talked about the promotion from within and sometimes that not being the right fit, I have to share this story. It's one of my favorites. I had a top performing salesperson reporting to me. And I mean, she was great, just, definitely heads and shoulders above the rest of her colleagues. And when she would get the recognition, she said probably one of the funniest things I've ever heard a salesperson say. And that's where she said, "Whatever you do, Kelly, please don't reward me by giving me people to manage."
Yeah.
It has always resonated. She loved what she did and she was a rock star at what she did. But we would have made a big mistake making the assumption that would have been the right move. It wouldn't have motivated her, and it would have taken a top producer out. Leading a team of salespeople is a different skill set than actually doing sales. It's got different components to it. And we see a lot of you were good at this job, so you must be good at leading the team in sales. And we know that that's a true struggle.
Yeah.
And then from the recruitment background, which we both have, finding that talent is difficult, but it is so worth waiting and being thorough in getting the right person. The wrong person in that seat has such a ripple effect. It takes time to get them ramped up. If there's performance issues, you manage through that. Then there's the offboarding. You can really miss a year to 2 years of revenue progress just in those moments.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to mention too that we see quite a bit, when there's an entrepreneur that's hiring their first traditional business development person, we've often seen these leaders overshoot the success profile and look for the person with the Rolodex, with the experience, probably overpay, more guaranteed money. And just kind of hope that they're going to come in with very little oversight. Hey, I hired an experienced person. I'm going to point them in the direction. I'm going to turn them loose. Here's some very loose bumper lanes. And, within the first, call it 3 to 6 months, there's a lot less aligned activity than hoped for. And the pressure really starts to ramp up. And so there's a responsibility of the entrepreneur to do the work. There's a lot of things, a lot of intellectual property here that needs to be memorialized. And often our entrepreneurs aren't our best at slowing down to, write out all the things that they've done and put it in a fashion that can be followed by others. And so that's where that work becomes so important. Whoever's selling your organization, it has to be on brand. It has to be authentic to your organization. Otherwise, there's going to be misalignment. And so the best analogy is, you want to build the plane and then hire someone to fly that plane rather than to hire someone to come in and build their own plane and fly in whatever direction they believe it should go. Right. So there's just work to safeguard doing this for the first time. And we see that step missed all too often.
Yeah, and we have the process component in EOS where we capture what are the critical processes in a business, and always the sales process is a component of that. And when we talk about capturing the processes, we're not talking about like a 700-page standard operating procedure manual that nobody will ever read. It's really capturing what are those repeatable best steps that every sale needs to go through, create the consistency of experience for the clients as well as internal to the business. And it tends to be the least favorite part of EOS implementation, which is the process because it takes discipline and it takes some focus, but it's probably one of the most valuable in that it gets everybody moving on the same page, following the same techniques. And ultimately that's what scalability is, and then hiring to the ability to execute on that. Once it's in place, it's very refreshing and people are like, oh, that's how we do it. But getting there is tough. So I'm sure part of your process must be helping them really define and create that tried and true process for their own business.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting about that, so once you have the strategy really clear, and then once you've been able to define that process that you're describing, then it makes sense to figure out who, right? So, like, based on your funnel, based on your sales funnel, you know, where is their strength? Where are their deficiencies? What do the gearing ratios look like? So we've seen organizations that really they only needed someone to sit on the top of the funnel and bring in more qualified opportunities. And then, we were able to convert at a really high rate because we had certain people that could take those qualified opportunities and close them. So they didn't need to hire the X years experience with, this guaranteed money. Really we just needed, one or two people that could just, really focus on prospecting and connection and a little light pre-qualification. And that had a big impact on revenue. So once the strategy and process is in place, then the structure becomes a lot more simple and you can really get clear on KPIs and comp.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, I love that. I've obviously seen your system. I love that it's got a methodology to it. It's got a framework that you take your clients through, and your intent, just like in EOS, is you're not there to land and expand as a consultant. You're in to teach, train, give them tools, mentor them so that they can stand on their own and be their own strong team at some point. So I definitely subscribe to that with the EOS methodology and yours as well. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to mention or comment on before we finish our session today?
Yeah, there's one thing that you had mentioned earlier about the marketing piece that, has just kind of been dancing and it didn't fit in exactly earlier, but um, I can't believe how many organizations we've walked into that are working with a marketing firm or have an internal marketing person where that ideal client profile isn't clearly defined, and the key stakeholder or stakeholders, what they care about, what they want and need, their pains and desired gains isn't clearly defined. And so we literally have walked into organizations where, they're investing marketing dollars and all it's doing is driving more of the wrong prospects into their funnel and overwhelming a sales organization with limited bandwidth. And we're spending more time sorting through misaligned opportunities than we are really focused on our best.
Right.
And, we're not a marketing firm. That's not our specialty. And we have, over the last 6 years, come to work with and know some great partners in that space. But boy, is that sales and marketing alignment so critical for organizations. If you're truly focused on growing the business, winning the right customers is the main thing, and doing that due diligence first is just a critical step.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. It's so true. And sometimes I think marketing feels to the organizations maybe a little easier than the engineering of a sales process. So it tends to get attention first. We do the easier things first in a lot of companies versus hitting the necessary hard stuff first, which is really getting your sales team and processes and tools down pat. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being with us today. We love that you're an EOS referral partner of ours, and look forward to working with you in the upcoming year. So wishing you much health and happiness here this season. And again, thank you so much for your participation and your wisdom and insights.
Kelly, thank you. And the one last thing that I'll say, over the course of the last 6 years, we've had an opportunity to work with a lot of organizations, those that work with EOS are far and away so much more equipped to grow and scale in a more meaningful way and do. I mean, it is literally a night and day, and it took us several years to like truly understand, you know, how different these organizations are. But the ones that have EOS,
Mhm.
when we get an opportunity to start partnering with, it accelerates in a very different way than those that don't. So we are self practitioners and huge advocates. And as our organization continues to grow, we'll be looking for help on a true implementer ourselves. So thank you. Your work is awesome, and I really appreciate you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott.